The gunshot that shattered the morning silence sent Katherine Zimmerman diving behind the wooden counter of her late father's mercantile, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I said I want my money, Miss Zimmerman." Theodore Polk's voice carried through the empty store, sharp and merciless as a rattlesnake's strike. "Your daddy's been dead 3 months now, and that debt don't die with him. You got until sundown, or I'm taking this building and everything in it." Katherine pressed her palm against the rough floorboards, dust coating her fingers as she tried to steady her breathing. The mercantile in Lone Pine, Nevada, had been her father's pride, built with his own hands back in 1878 when silver still ran thick in the nearby mines. Now, 5 years later in the summer of 1883, those mines had mostly played out, and so had her father's luck. Heart failure had taken him in April, leaving Katherine with nothing but debts she had not known existed and a creditor who seemed to take pleasure in her suffering. "Mr. Polk, please," she called out, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I just need more time. The store is doing better. I can pay you back, I swear it." Another shot rang out, splintering the wooden beam above her head. Katherine flinched, pressing herself lower. Through the gap beneath the counter, she could see Polk's polished boots advancing across the floor, each step deliberate and threatening. "Time's the one thing you don't have, girl. That's $1,500 your daddy borrowed. $1,500 I want back today, or this store becomes mine. You can go work at the saloon if you need money so bad." The insult burned, but Katherine bit back her response. She knew what working at the saloon meant for women without options. Her father had raised her better than that, taught her to read and write and run a business. She would not throw that away, no matter how desperate things became. The door to the mercantile swung open with such force it banged against the wall. Katherine could not see who had entered, but she heard the sudden silence that fell over the room, thick and heavy as storm clouds. "Store's closed," Polk snapped. "Get out. Don't appear close to me." The voice that answered was deep and rough, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. "Appears you're threatening a woman with a firearm. That's what it appears." Katherine risked raising her head just enough to peer over the counter. The man who had entered filled the doorway like he had been carved from the mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the morning sunlight streaming through the entrance. Long dark hair, shot through with hints of auburn, fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as winter steel and just as hard as they fixed on Theodore Polk. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Polk said, but Katherine heard the slight waver in his voice. The creditor was a big man himself, heavy and soft from too many years behind a desk, but he looked small compared to the newcomer, making it my concern. The stranger stepped fully into the store, and Katherine could see the layers of muscle that moved beneath his worn leather vest and canvas shirt. His hands, large and calloused, hung loose at his sides, but there was something in his stance that suggested he could move very quickly if needed. "Lady don't seem interested in whatever you're selling. Asked you nice for more time from what I heard." Polk's face reddened. "She owes me money. $1,500 her dead daddy borrowed and never paid back. That's a legal debt, and I got the papers to prove it. Shooting up her store seems like a poor way to collect." The stranger's voice remained level, but his eyes never left Polk. "Seems like the kind of thing the sheriff might find interesting." "Sheriff don't care about business disputes," Polk said, but he lowered his gun slightly. "And like I said, this ain't your concern." The stranger was quiet for a long moment, his gaze sweeping the store before finally landing on Katherine. She found herself unable to look away from those gray eyes, feeling something shift in her chest as their gazes met. He studied her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but instead felt strangely protective. "How much did you say?" the stranger asked, still looking at Katherine. 1,500, Polk repeated. "And it's due today, or I'm taking possession of this building and all its contents per the loan agreement." The stranger finally looked back at Polk. "You got those papers on you?" Polk's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "Right here. All legal and proper." "Let me see it." "Why should I?" "Because I'm asking nice." There was no threat in the stranger's words, but something in his tone made Polk's hand shake slightly as he held out the paper. The stranger crossed the room in 3 long strides, took the document, and studied it carefully. Katherine watched as his eyes moved across the page, surprised that a mountain man could read. She had made assumptions about him based on his appearance, the buckskin trousers and the knife at his belt, the general air of someone more comfortable with wilderness than civilization. "This says payments due by end of business today," the stranger said after a moment. "Don't say nothing about you having the right to shoot up the place if she can't pay." "I was just encouraging her to take the debt seriously," Polk said. "That what you call it?" The stranger folded the paper and tucked it into his own pocket. "Well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to pay this debt. Full amount. You're going to take your money and leave Miss Zimmerman alone. We clear?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Katherine's mouth fell open and she gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. $1,500 was more money than most people in Lone Pine saw in years. It was enough to buy a small ranch or start a mining operation. And this stranger, this man whose name she did not even know, was offering to pay it just like that. "Now hold on," Polk said, his face twisting with confusion and suspicion. "Who the hell are you and why would you pay her debt?" "Name's Garrett Quinn. Been trapping up in the Ruby Mountains past few years. Did well enough. Got money in the bank over in Elko. We can ride over there right now. I'll withdraw what's needed and we'll settle this. Or you can keep making trouble and I'll go fetch the sheriff anyway. Your choice." Polk looked between Garrett and Katherine, clearly trying to work out what was happening. "There's something going on between you two. She your woman or something." "Never met the lady before I walked through that door 30 seconds ago," Garrett said calmly. "But I don't take kindly to men terrorizing women and I got money to spare. So what's it going to be?" Katherine found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Mr. Quinn, I cannot possibly accept such a thing. That's too much money. I don't even know you." Garrett turned those gray eyes back to her and she felt her breath catch. "You rather deal with him?" He jerked his head toward Polk. "Because from where I'm standing, you got 2 choices. Let me help or lose everything your father built. I'm offering a third option." "But why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Something flickered across Garrett's face, too quick for her to read. "Let's just say I know what it's like to lose everything. Figure I can stop it from happening to someone else. Why not?" Polk cleared his throat loudly. "This is highly irregular. If you're paying her debt, I want something in writing saying the loan's been satisfied. And I want to see that money today. Real money, not promises." "Bank in Elko's a 2-hour ride," Garrett said. "We can be back by mid-afternoon. That's soon enough. It'll have to be." Polk holstered his gun, though his expression remained sour. "But if you don't show up with my money, Quinn, I'm taking this building and filing charges against both of you for fraud. We'll be there." Garrett's voice carried absolute certainty. "Meet us at the sheriff's office at 3. We'll do the exchange there, all legal and proper." Polk looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Garrett's steady gaze made him reconsider. He snatched the paper back from Garrett's pocket. shot a venomous look at Katherine, and stomped out of the mercantile, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed felt deafening. Katherine slowly stood up from behind the counter, her legs shaky and her mind reeling. Garrett remained where he was, giving her space, and she appreciated that more than she could say. He did not crowd her or demand immediate gratitude. He just waited, patient as stone. "I don't understand," Katherine said finally, smoothing down her dusty skirt with trembling hands. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you do this?" Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting around the mercantile, taking in the shelves of dry goods, the barrels of flour and sugar, the carefully organized inventory that Katherine had worked so hard to maintain after her father's death. "My father had a store like this back in Missouri," he said eventually. "When I was young, Creditor came calling one winter, wanted more than my pa could pay. Took everything. Whole family ended up on the street. My little sister caught pneumonia that winter. She was only 6 years old." The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, and Katherine felt her heart clench. "I'm so sorry." "Long time ago now," Garrett said, but his jaw was tight. "But I remember what it felt like being helpless. When I heard that shot and walked in here and saw what was happening, I figured maybe this time things could go different. Maybe this time the family keeps what's theirs." Katherine pressed her hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the generosity and the tragedy both. "But $1,500. That's your money, your work. I cannot just take it." "Not asking you to take it," Garrett said. "I'm paying your debt. What you do after that is your business." "There has to be something," Katherine insisted. "Some way I can repay you. I could give you a share of the store's profits or work off the debt or something." Garrett shook his head. "Don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" The question came out more desperate than she intended, but Katherine could not help it. No one did something like this without wanting anything in return. It did not make sense. Garrett met her eyes again, and this time she saw something softer in that gray gaze, something almost hesitant. "Your time," he said quietly. "That's all. Been living alone in the mountains for near 5 years now. Good life in some ways, but lonely. I just want some company, someone to talk to. Maybe share a few meals, take a walk now and then. That's all I'm asking." Katherine stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was honesty and a loneliness that matched something deep in her own chest. Since her father died, she had been alone too, struggling to keep the store running while the townspeople whispered about her behind their hands. A young, unmarried woman running a business was scandalous enough. A young, unmarried woman with debts was practically a pariah. "Just my time?" she asked carefully. "Nothing else." "Nothing else," Garrett confirmed. "You say when and how much. If you want to tell me to leave you alone after today, that's your right. I won't hold the debt over your head. You got my word on that, for whatever that's worth to you." It was worth more than he probably realized. Katherine had become an excellent judge of character over the past few months, learning quickly to distinguish between men who wanted to help and men who wanted to take advantage. Something in her gut told her that Garrett Quinn was exactly what he appeared to be, a lonely man with money to spare and a memory that still hurt. "Okay," she said, the word coming out barely above a whisper. Then stronger, "Okay. Yes, if you're truly willing to do this, then I accept. And I'll be happy to give you my time. It's the least I can do." Relief flickered across Garrett's face so quick she almost missed it. "Good, that's good. Now we should probably get moving if we're going to make it to Elko and back by 3. You got a horse?" "In the stable out back." "Her name's Daisy. Go get yourself ready, bring water. It's going to be hot riding today." Garrett moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. And Miss Zimmerman, you might want to bring that ledger on your counter. Want to make sure we know exactly what Polk's owed, so there's no dispute later." Katherine nodded, grateful for his practical thinking. Her mind was still spinning, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 10 minutes. She gathered the ledger, along with all the papers related to her father's loan, and tucked them into a leather satchel. Then she locked up the mercantile, flipped the sign to closed, and went to saddle Daisy. The mare nickered softly as Katherine entered the stable, nosing at her pocket in search of treats. "Not now, girl," Katherine murmured, running her hand down the horse's neck. "We've got a long ride ahead." By the time she led Daisy out into the sunlight, Garrett had retrieved his own horse from wherever he had left it. The animal was a massive roan gelding, easily 16 hands high, with the same quiet strength as its owner. Garrett checked his saddle with practiced efficiency, then swung up onto the horse's back with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. Katherine mounted Daisy with less grace, still shaky from the morning's events. But once she was settled, she felt a bit more grounded. Riding was something she knew, something familiar. They set out from Lone Pine heading east, the morning sun climbing steadily higher in the cloudless Nevada sky. The air was already warm and would only get hotter as the day progressed. Katherine was grateful she had thought to bring her wide-brimmed hat. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Katherine kept stealing glances at Garrett, trying to reconcile the image of a rough mountain man with someone who would pay a stranger's enormous debt just for companionship. He sat his horse like he had been born in the saddle, moving with the animal's rhythm in that way that only people who spent most of their lives outdoors ever achieved. His profile was strong, all hard angles and weathered skin, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that suggested he carried burdens heavier than just his pack. "How long have you been trapping?" Katherine asked finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "Started when I was 18, Garrett said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of hoofbeats. "So about 11 years now. Spent some time working ranches first, learning the land, but trapping suited me better. Less people, more freedom. Don't you miss civilization?" Townspeople conversation, a slight smile tugged at the corner of Garrett's mouth. "Sometimes. More than I used to anyway. Gets old talking to yourself after a while. Even the mountain lions don't make for great conversation." Katherine laughed, surprised by the sudden humor. "I imagine not." "Do you see them often?" "Mountain lions. Often enough. Had one follow me for 3 days once, trying to figure out if I was prey or competition. Eventually decided I wasn't worth the trouble and moved on. That must have been terrifying." Garrett shrugged, the movement making muscles shift beneath his shirt. "You learn to respect them, give them space. Most animals don't want trouble any more than people do. They just want to survive." They talked more as they rode, the conversation flowing easier than Katherine would have expected. Garrett told her about life in the Ruby Mountains, about winters so cold your breath froze in your beard and summers, when the wildflowers painted the meadows every color imaginable. He talked about tracking elk and beaver, about finding the perfect spots for his traps and building temporary shelters that would withstand mountain storms. In turn, Katherine told him about growing up in Lone Pine, about her father teaching her the mercantile business from the time she was old enough to count. She told him about her mother, who had died when Katherine was 12, and how her father had never quite recovered from that loss. She did not mention that she suspected her father's debts had been related to gambling, money thrown away trying to fill the void her mother's death had left. Some things were too painful to share with a stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. The ride to Elko took just over 2 hours, as Garrett had predicted. The town was larger than Lone Pine, with a proper main street and several substantial buildings. The bank was an imposing structure of brick and wood, one of the few buildings in town built to last. Garrett dismounted and offered his hand to help Katherine down from Daisy. His hand was warm and rough with calluses, and Katherine felt a strange flutter in her stomach at the contact. She released his hand quickly, unsettled by her own reaction. Inside the bank, Garrett approached the teller with quiet confidence. "Need to make a withdrawal. Garrett Quinn should have an account here." The teller, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, consulted his ledger. "Ah yes, Mr. Quinn, haven't seen you in quite some time. How much would you like to withdraw?" $1,500. The teller's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "That's quite a substantial sum, Mr. Quinn. May I ask what it's for?" "Paying off a debt for the lady," Garrett said simply, gesturing to Katherine. The teller looked between them, clearly curious but professional enough not to pry further. "Very well. I'll need you to sign some papers, and it'll take me a few minutes to count out that amount." The transaction took nearly half an hour, with the teller carefully counting out the money twice to ensure accuracy. Katherine watched in stunned silence as stack after stack of bills appeared on the counter. She had never seen so much cash in one place before. It made her feel dizzy and slightly sick, knowing that Garrett was about to hand all of this over to Theodore Polk on her behalf. "Mr. Quinn," she said quietly while the teller was preparing the final paperwork, "are you absolutely certain about this? That's nearly all your savings, isn't it?" Garrett glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Got enough left over, don't worry about me." "How can I not worry? You're giving away a fortune." "Money's just money," Garrett said. "It comes and goes. Been poor before, I'll be poor again probably. But I won't be the reason you lose your father's store. That's worth more to me than any amount of cash." The simple conviction in his words made Katherine's throat tight with emotion. She had spent the last 3 months feeling utterly alone, convinced that no one in the world cared whether she succeeded or failed. And now this man, this stranger who had walked into her life less than 3 hours ago, was proving that wrong in the most dramatic way possible. They left the bank with the money secured in Garrett's saddlebag and began the ride back to Lone Pine. The sun was high now, beating down mercilessly, and Katherine was grateful for the water they had brought. They stopped once at a small creek to let the horses drink and rest in the shade of some cottonwood trees. "What will you do now?" Katherine asked as they sat on the creek bank, the sound of running water peaceful in the afternoon heat. "After today, I mean. Will you go back to the mountains?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, tossing pebbles into the creek. "Haven't decided yet. Been thinking maybe it's time for a change. 5 years is a long time to spend alone. Man starts to forget how to be around people." "You seem to be doing fine to me," Katherine said. "You're easy to be around," Garrett replied, glancing at her with a small smile. "Don't feel like I have to pretend to be something I'm not." Katherine felt her cheeks warm, and it had nothing to do with the heat. "I feel the same way. Usually, people in town either pity me or look down on me. A woman my age should be married with children, according to them. Running a business on my own is somehow scandalous." "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" 22, Katherine said. "I know, practically an old maid," Garrett snorted. 22 is young. You got your whole life ahead of you, and there's nothing wrong with running a business. Takes brains and guts to do what you're doing. People who look down on that are fools." The casual certainty in his words warmed something in Katherine's chest. She studied his profile as he looked out over the creek, noting the way the dappled sunlight caught in his long hair and the strength in his weathered features. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough and unpolished way. Nothing like the few suitors who had briefly shown interest before her father's debts became public knowledge. Those men had been soft and civilized, with clean hands and proper manners. Garrett was all hard edges and quiet strength, more mountain lion than house cat. "We should get moving," Garrett said, standing and offering his hand again. "Want to make sure we're on time to meet Polk." They arrived in Lone Pine with an hour to spare before the 3 o'clock meeting. Katherine suggested they stop at the small restaurant on the edge of town to get some food, since neither of them had eaten since morning. Garrett agreed, and they secured the horses before entering the modest building. The restaurant was run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, whose husband had worked the mines before a cave-in took his life. She served simple but good food, and more importantly, she had always been kind to Katherine, even after her father died. "Katherine," Mrs. Chen greeted them warmly as they entered, then her eyes widened as she took in Garrett. "And who is this?" "Garrett Quinn, madam," Garrett said, removing his hat politely. "Pleased to meet you." "Mrs. Chen runs the best restaurant in Lone Pine," Katherine said. "Only restaurant in Lone Pine," Mrs. Chen corrected with a laugh. "But I'll take the compliment. Sit, sit. You both look like you've been riding hard. I'll bring you some food." They settled at a table by the window, and Mrs. Chen quickly brought them plates of beef stew with fresh bread. Katherine realized how hungry she was and ate with more enthusiasm than was probably ladylike. Garrett seemed to have no such concerns, eating steadily and efficiently. "So," Mrs. Chen said, appearing at their table as they finished eating, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Are you going to tell me what's going on, Katherine? The whole town's been talking about how Theodore Polk went storming out of your store this morning, and now you show up with this handsome stranger. People are very curious." Katherine felt her face heat. "It's not what it looks like. Looks like you got yourself a man who cares about you, Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "Which is about time if you ask me." "Mrs. Chen," Katherine protested, mortified, but Garrett just chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Just helping out where I can, madam, no strings attached." Mrs. Chen looked between them and smiled knowingly. We'll see about that." She patted Katherine's shoulder before heading back to the kitchen, leaving Katherine burning with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," Katherine said to Garrett. "She means well, but she can be a bit much sometimes." "Don't worry about it," Garrett said easily. "Seems like she cares about you." That's worth something. At 3 o'clock precisely, they arrived at the sheriff's office. Theodore Polk was already there, pacing impatiently outside the building. Sheriff Daniels, a grizzled man in his 50s with a magnificent mustache, stood nearby, arms crossed and expression suspicious. "About time," Polk snapped. "I was starting to think you'd run off." "Said I'd be here, so I'm here," Garrett said calmly. He pulled the saddlebag with the money from his horse and carried it inside the office. The others followed. The transaction took another hour, with the sheriff insisting on counting every dollar twice to ensure there was no dispute later. Polk's eyes gleamed as he watched the money being stacked on the desk, his whole body practically vibrating with greed. Katherine felt sick watching him, knowing this money could have bought Garrett land or a house or security for years to come, and instead it was going to this horrible man. But Garrett's expression never changed. He stood calm and patient while the sheriff counted, then signed all the necessary papers to confirm the debt had been paid in full. The sheriff made copies of everything, ensuring that Katherine had proof the loan was satisfied. "There," Sheriff Daniels said finally, handing a document to Katherine. "You keep that somewhere safe. Means Polk here has no more claim on you or your store." Katherine clutched the paper like it was made of gold. "Thank you, Sheriff." Polk stuffed the money into his own bag, his sour expression suggesting he was disappointed things had worked out this way. "I suppose this concludes our business then, Miss Zimmerman," Can't say it's been a pleasure. The feeling is mutual, Katherine said coldly. Polk shot a glare at Garrett, as if blaming him personally for interfering, then stormed out of the office. The sheriff watched him go, then turned to Garrett. "That was a good thing you did today, Mr. Quinn," he said. "Polk's been getting more aggressive with his collections lately. Been looking for a reason to step in, but debts are legal matters. Still, I'm glad Miss Zimmerman didn't have to deal with him alone anymore." "Just happened to be in the right place at the right time," Garrett said. "Well, you're welcome in Lone Pine anytime," the sheriff said, shaking Garrett's hand firmly. "We could use more men like you around here." They left the sheriff's office as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Katherine felt like she was floating, unable to quite believe that the debt that had been crushing her for months was simply gone. Her store was hers again, free and clear. She could breathe for the first time since her father died. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Garrett as they stood on the street, suddenly awkward now that the immediate crisis was over. "What you did today, it was beyond anything I could have hoped for or expected. You saved my life, truly." Garrett looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Just did what seemed right. You don't owe me anything except what you're willing to give." "You asked for my time," Katherine said, "so I want you to have it. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? I'm not nearly as good a cook as Mrs. Chen, but I can manage something decent. It's the least I can do." A slow smile spread across Garrett's face, transforming his features from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "I'd like that very much." They made plans for Garrett to come by Katherine's small house behind the Mercantile at 7 o'clock, and then they parted ways. Katherine practically ran home, her mind racing with everything she needed to do. She had to clean the house, which had been neglected lately, and figure out what to cook, and maybe change into something nicer than the dusty dress she had been wearing all day. It was not until she was halfway through scrubbing the kitchen floor that Katherine paused and really thought about what she was doing. She was preparing for a man to come to dinner, and not just any man, but one who had just paid $1,500 on her behalf. A man who made her heart race when he smiled and whose protective presence had made her feel safer than she had in months. Was this how it started? She wondered. Was this what falling in love felt like? The thought should have scared her, but instead it filled her with a cautious, trembling hope. After 3 months of darkness and despair, maybe there was light after all. Maybe there was a chance for something good. Garrett arrived at 7 o'clock exactly, freshly washed and with his long hair tied back. He had changed into a clean shirt that somehow made his shoulders look even broader, and he carried a bottle of wine that must have cost a significant portion of what little money he had left. "You didn't have to bring anything," Katherine said as she let him in, but she was touched by the gesture. "Ma raised me to never show up empty-handed," Garrett said. "Besides, figured we're celebrating, seemed appropriate." Katherine had made roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, simple fare but cooked well. They ate at her small kitchen table, and the conversation flowed as easily as it had during their ride. Garrett told her more stories about his life in the mountains, about close calls with bears and finding hidden valleys that maybe no white man had ever seen before. Katherine talked about the challenges of running the Mercantile, about dealing with difficult customers and managing inventory, and trying to compete with the larger store in the next town over. "You're good at it," Garrett observed. "I could tell from looking at your store. Everything organized, well-maintained. Your father taught you well." "He did," Katherine agreed softly. "He wasn't perfect, but he tried his best after my mother died. I just wish he had told me about the debt before it got so bad. Maybe I could have helped somehow." "Some men have too much pride to ask for help," Garrett said. I understand that feeling. Spent a lot of years refusing to admit I needed anybody, but loneliness has a way of wearing down pride eventually. Is that why you came to town today? Katherine asked gently. Because you were lonely. Garrett was quiet for a long moment, turning his wine glass slowly in his large hands. Partly. And partly because I heard that shot and something in me just reacted. Couldn't stand by and do nothing. I'm glad you didn't, Katherine said. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't walked through that door. Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt that flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. There was something in the way Garrett looked at her, something warm and hungry and yet respectful all at once. It made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. They talked long into the night, until the candles burned low and Katherine realized with a start that it was past midnight. Garrett noticed the time as well and stood reluctantly. "Should let you get some rest," he said. "Thank you for dinner. It was wonderful." Katherine walked him to the door, not wanting the evening to end but knowing it had to. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked, then felt embarrassed by how eager she sounded. But Garrett just smiled. "If you want to, remember this is your choice." "But I'd like that if you're willing." "I'm willing," Katherine said softly. "More than willing." Garrett reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender that Katherine's breath caught. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Garrett." She watched him walk away into the darkness, heading toward the boarding house where he had apparently secured a room. When he was out of sight, Katherine closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the rapid beat, and smiled despite herself. The next morning, Katherine opened the mercantile with a lightness in her step that had been absent for months. News of yesterday's confrontation with Polk had spread through Lone Pine like wildfire, and she had a steady stream of customers all morning, most of whom seemed more interested in gossip than shopping. "Is it true some mountain man paid your entire debt?" asked Martha Williams, the doctor's wife, as she pretended to examine fabric. "Just paid it, no questions asked." "It's true," Katherine confirmed, keeping her voice neutral. "And what did he want in return?" Martha's eyes gleamed with curiosity and perhaps a hint of scandal-seeking. "Conversation," Katherine said simply. "Just someone to talk to." Martha looked deeply skeptical, but before she could press further, the door opened and Garrett walked in. He looked slightly uncomfortable to find the store full of people, all of whom turned to stare at him with unconcealed interest. "Morning," he said to Katherine, ignoring everyone else. "You busy, or can you take a break?" "I can take a break," Katherine said quickly, grateful for the excuse to escape the gossiping women. She called to her young assistant, Emma, to watch the counter, then joined Garrett outside. "Sorry for interrupting," Garrett said once they were alone. "But I wanted to ask if you'd like to take a ride this afternoon. There's a place up in the hills I'd like to show you if you're interested." "I'd love that," Katherine said. "I can close the store early. Business is mostly done by 3 anyway." They made plans to meet at 4, and Garrett left to take care of some errands. Katherine returned to the store to find all the women buzzing with speculation. "That man is absolutely besotted with you," Martha declared. "Did you see the way he looked at you?" Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes that's all it takes," said another woman, Helen Preston. "My husband proposed after knowing me for 2 weeks. We've been married 30 years now." The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Katherine kept glancing at the clock, willing time to move faster. When 4 o'clock finally arrived, she locked up the store and hurried to saddle Daisy. Garrett was already waiting, his big roan horse looking fresh and eager. They rode out of town heading west, up into the hills that surrounded Lone Pine. The landscape here was harsh but beautiful, all sagebrush and scattered pines clinging to rocky soil. Garrett led the way with confident familiarity, and Katherine wondered if he had scouted the area before coming to town. After about an hour of riding, they crested a ridge and Katherine gasped. Before them stretched a small hidden valley, green with grass and dotted with wildflowers. A stream ran through the center, and the whole place was sheltered by hills on all sides, creating a pocket of unexpected lushness in the otherwise arid landscape. "How did you find this?" Katherine breathed, taking in the beauty. "Was exploring a few days ago," Garrett said. "Thought you might like it." They dismounted and let the horses graze while they walked along the stream. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the air smelled of sage and pine and growing things. It felt like they had stepped into a different world, far removed from the dusty streets and complications of town. "I've lived near Lone Pine my whole life and never knew this place existed," Katherine said, marveling at the wildflowers. "Sometimes the best things are hidden," Garrett said. He settled on a flat rock beside the stream and Katherine joined him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, just listening to the water and the wind. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said eventually. "Anything. Why did you really help me yesterday? And please tell me the truth." "Was it just about your father's store?" Garrett was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. But finally he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "That was part of it, but the truth is when I walked into your store and saw you behind that counter, something in me just knew. Knew that you were important. Knew that I couldn't let anything happen to you. I don't expect you to understand that because I don't fully understand it myself. But I believe in trusting my gut, and my gut said you mattered." Katherine's heart was beating very fast now. "You felt that just from seeing me." "I did." Garrett turned to look at her, those gray eyes intense. "Still do. Being around you feels right in a way nothing else has for a long time. That probably sounds crazy." "No," Katherine said softly. "It doesn't sound crazy at all, because I feel it too." The admission hung in the air between them, huge and fragile. Garrett reached out slowly, giving Katherine plenty of time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. His palm was warm and rough, his grip gentle despite his obvious strength. "I know this is fast," he said. "And I know I'm not exactly what most women are looking for. I don't have a fancy house or a stable job or any of the things a proper suitor should have. But I want to spend time with you, Katherine. I want to know everything about you. I want to see if this feeling between us is real." "It feels real to me," Katherine whispered. She squeezed his hand, marveling at how right it felt to be touching him. "But you're right, it is fast. I barely know you." "Then let's take time to know each other," Garrett said. "No rushing, just spending time together like we agreed. And if it grows into something more, then we'll figure it out as we go. Does that sound fair?" It sounded more than fair. It sounded like exactly what Katherine needed. "Yes," she said. "I'd like that very much." They stayed in the hidden valley until sunset, talking about everything and nothing. Garrett told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents and siblings and what had happened to them after they lost the store. His father had never recovered, emotionally or financially, and had died bitter and broken 5 years later. His mother had remarried, a decent enough man who gave her stability but no passion. His surviving siblings were scattered across the frontier, making their own ways in the world. Katherine shared more about her own history, about the happy childhood before her mother's death and the quieter, sadder years that followed. She talked about her father's gradual withdrawal into himself and the gambling habit that had developed as he tried to feel something besides grief. She talked about how lonely she had been, how the burden of the debt had made her feel like she was drowning. "You're not alone anymore," Garrett said firmly. "Even if nothing else comes of this, you've got a friend now, someone who'll stand by you, I promise you that." And Katherine believed him. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern. Garrett would come by the Mercantile in the mornings, often bringing her coffee from Mrs. Chen's restaurant. They would talk for a while, and then he would leave to take care of whatever business he had that day. Sometimes he helped around town, using his considerable strength to assist with construction projects or repairs. Other times he would disappear into the hills for hours, always returning with stories about what he had seen. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, either at Katherine's house or at the restaurant. Afterward, they would walk through town or ride out to some scenic spot Garrett had discovered. They talked endlessly, discovering shared opinions on some topics and friendly disagreements on others. Katherine found herself laughing more than she had in years, and the worry lines that had creased her forehead began to smooth out. The people of Lone Pine watched this courtship with great interest. Some approved, happy to see Katherine with someone who clearly cared for her. Others were more skeptical, whispering about mountain men and wondering what Garrett's real intentions were. But Katherine found she did not care much about the gossip. For the first time in her life, she was making choices for herself, and it felt liberating. On the 3rd week, Garrett took her fishing at a lake high in the mountains. It required half a day's ride to reach, so they left before dawn and packed supplies for a full-day trip. The lake was pristine and clear, fed by snowmelt from the higher peaks, and surrounded by pine trees that had probably stood for hundreds of years. "This is where I spent most of last winter," Garrett said as they prepared their fishing poles. "Built a cabin on the far side of the lake. Small thing, but it kept me warm and dry." "Will you go back to it?" Katherine asked, trying to keep her voice casual, though the thought of Garrett leaving filled her with unexpected dread. Garrett cast his line into the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. "Don't know yet. Been thinking a lot about what I want for the future. 5 years ago, when I came out here, I wanted solitude, wanted to get away from people and their complications. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Now solitude just feels like loneliness. What would you do if you didn't go back?" Katherine asked. "Been thinking about that too." Garrett reeled in his line and cast again. "Maybe settle down somewhere, buy some land, build a proper house. Maybe start a ranch or a farm, something stable, something permanent." Katherine's heart was beating hard. "That sounds nice." Doesn't it?" Garrett glanced at her, and there was something searching in his gaze. "Question is where, and with who?" Their eyes locked, and Katherine felt the weight of everything unspoken between them. They had been dancing around it for weeks now, this growing connection that neither of them could deny. But saying it out loud, acknowledging what they both felt, would change everything. "Garrett," Katherine began, but he held up a hand gently. "Don't have to say anything yet," he said. "Just want you to know I've been thinking about it, about staying, about building something here if you'd want that too." "I do want it," Katherine said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I want you to stay. These past few weeks have been the happiest I've been in years. Maybe ever, and it's because of you, because of how you make me feel." Garrett set down his fishing pole and moved closer to her, taking both her hands in his. "How do I make you feel? Safe," Katherine said. "And seen. And like maybe I could have something more than just surviving day to day. Like maybe I could actually be happy." "You make me feel alive again," Garrett said, his voice rough with emotion. "Like maybe I'm worth something more than just existing in the wilderness. You make me want to be better, do better, build something that matters." He raised one hand to cup her face, his touch infinitely gentle. Katherine leaned into it, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment. When she opened them again, Garrett was closer, his face mere inches from hers. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Please," Katherine whispered. Garrett's lips met hers with a tenderness that made her heart ache. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, everything a first kiss should be. Katherine's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and she melted into him. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Garrett rested his forehead against hers, and Katherine could feel him smiling. "Been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Me too," Katherine said, laughing slightly. They spent the rest of the day by the lake, fishing and talking and stealing kisses when the mood struck them. It was perfect and simple, and exactly what Katherine had not known she needed. By the time they rode back to Lone Pine as the sun set, she felt like a different person than the terrified woman who had hidden behind her counter 4 weeks ago. Word of their relationship, now official in everyone's minds, spread quickly. Katherine found herself receiving congratulations from people who had ignored her just weeks earlier, along with advice from every married woman in town. Mrs. Chen was particularly delighted, taking personal credit for their romance somehow. "I knew the moment I saw you two together," she insisted. "Had that look about you, the look of people who belong together." Garrett took the attention with good-natured embarrassment, more comfortable with mountain lions than with social approval. But he bore it for Katherine's sake, understanding that being part of a community meant accepting their interest and involvement. One evening, about a month after they first met, Garrett asked Katherine to take a walk with him after dinner. They strolled through town and out past the last buildings, up a small hill that overlooked Lone Pine. The lights of the town twinkled below them like fallen stars, and the night was clear and cool. "Been doing a lot of thinking," Garrett said as they stood looking at the view. "About what I want and where I want to be and who I want to be with." Katherine's heart began to race. She had been expecting this conversation, but now that it was here, she felt nervous and excited all at once. "And I keep coming back to the same answer," Garrett continued. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "You, Katherine, it's always you. These past weeks have shown me what my life could be like, what I want it to be like, and I can't imagine any of it without you." "Garrett," Katherine breathed. He dropped to one knee, and Katherine's hands flew to her mouth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire set in it. "I'm not a fancy man," Garrett said, looking up at her with those earnest gray eyes, "and I can't promise you an easy life. But I can promise you that I will work every day to make you happy. I will protect you and support you and stand by you no matter what comes. I love you, Katherine. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Katherine's face, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, of course I'll marry you. I love you too, Garrett, so much." He stood and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. Katherine laughed and cried at the same time, holding onto him tightly. When he set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Where did you get this?" Katherine asked, admiring the ring in the moonlight. "Been carrying it around for about 2 weeks, Garrett admitted. "Had it made by the jeweler in Elko. The sapphire reminded me of the lake where I first kissed you." That made Katherine cry harder, and she pulled him down for a kiss that conveyed everything she felt. They were married 6 weeks later, in October of 1883, at the small church in Lone Pine. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Garrett bought himself a proper suit that he looked endearingly uncomfortable in. The whole town turned out for the wedding, along with Garrett's mother and one of his brothers who managed to make the journey from Missouri. Sheriff Daniels gave Katherine away, and Mrs. Chen insisted on making the wedding cake. The reception was held at the restaurant, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the night. Katherine had never felt so loved or so happy. Every time she caught Garrett's eye across the room, he would smile at her with such warmth that she felt like she might burst. Their wedding night was spent in Katherine's little house behind the mercantile, which they had decided to keep as their home for now. Garrett carried her over the threshold, nearly hitting her head on the door frame and making them both laugh. "Some husband you are," Katherine teased. "Married less than a day and already trying to concuss me." "Give me time to improve," Garrett said, setting her down gently. "Still learning." Their lovemaking was tender and sweet, both of them nervous and eager and deeply in love. Garrett was infinitely gentle, making sure Katherine felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking in whispers until sleep claimed them both. Life as a married couple settled into a comfortable rhythm. Garrett took over the heavy work at the mercantile, moving inventory and dealing with deliveries while Katherine handled the books and customer service. They made a good team, complementing each other's strengths. The store's profits improved steadily as word spread that the Quinns were honest, hardworking, and fair. In the spring of 1884, Garrett bought a piece of land just outside of town. It was 50 acres of decent soil with a stream running through it and a nice grove of trees for shade. He started building a house with his own hands, working on it every spare moment. Katherine would bring him lunch and sit watching as he worked, marveling at his skill and dedication. "Used to help my pa build things back in Missouri," Garrett explained as he notched logs for the walls. "Before everything fell apart, feels good to use those skills for something that's ours." The house took months to complete, but when it was finished, it was beautiful. 2 stories with a big kitchen and a sitting room and 3 bedrooms upstairs. Garrett had carved details into the woodwork, little flowers and birds that showed an artistic side Katherine had not known he possessed. They moved in during the summer, and Katherine had never felt more at home. She spent weeks making curtains and arranging furniture, and turning the house into a place that felt lived in and loved. Garrett built her a garden plot, and she planted vegetables and flowers, delighting in watching things grow. In December of 1884, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Garrett over dinner, too excited to wait for a special moment. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and held her like she was made of glass. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "A real baby, our baby." "You're going to be a wonderful father," Katherine said, running her hands through his long hair. "Going to try my best," Garrett said, pressing his hand to her still flat stomach with a sense of wonder. "Want to give our child everything I didn't have. Stability, security, love. So much love." The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Katherine had her share of morning sickness and exhaustion. Garrett was constantly worried about her, fussing over her in ways that were both endearing and sometimes annoying. He insisted on doing all the heavy work at the store and would not let her lift anything heavier than a teacup. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," Katherine protested more than once. "Don't care," Garrett would reply stubbornly. "Not taking any chances with you or the baby." Their son was born in August of 1885 after a long labor that left Katherine exhausted but triumphant. Garrett was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, holding the tiny baby like he might break him. "He's so small," Garrett whispered, staring at his son in awe. "Our baby's supposed to be this small." "He's perfect," Katherine said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on anything. Now, looking at his son's tiny face, Garrett said, "James, after my father, but we'll call him Jamie." "Jamie Quinn," Katherine said, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, Jamie." Welcome to the world, little one. Fatherhood transformed Garrett in ways Katherine had not expected. The man who had been content to live alone in the mountains for years now could barely stand to be away from his family for more than a few hours. He doted on Jamie, changing diapers and walking the floor with him at night when he cried. He sang to him in a surprisingly good voice, old ballads from his childhood, and built him a beautiful wooden cradle that rocked smoothly. Katherine loved watching them together, her strong, protective husband reduced to putty by a baby's smile. It filled her heart so full she sometimes thought it might burst. Jamie grew from a baby to a toddler, and the Quinn family thrived. The mercantile was successful enough that they hired additional help, giving Katherine and Garrett more time to focus on their son and their land. Garrett expanded their property, buying adjacent acres and starting a small cattle operation. He hired a few ranch hands and proved to be a fair and respected boss. In the summer of 1887, Katherine found herself pregnant again. This time it was a girl, born in early 1888, who they named Sarah after Katherine's mother. Sarah had Katherine's dark hair and Garrett's gray eyes, and she was a calm, content baby who rarely fussed. Life continued to be good. The children grew healthy and happy. Jamie was curious and adventurous, constantly exploring and getting into trouble in the way of small boys. Sarah was quieter, preferring to sit and observe rather than jump into things. Garrett loved them both fiercely, and Katherine often found herself just watching her family, overwhelmed with gratitude for how much her life had changed. One evening, when Jamie was 5 and Sarah was 2, Katherine and Garrett sat on the porch of their house watching the children play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of sage and summer. "You remember the first time we met?" Katherine asked, reaching over to take Garrett's hand. "Every detail," Garrett said. "You were behind the counter in your store, terrified with Polk threatening you. I walked in and knew my life was about to change." "Did you really know right then?" "I did." Garrett squeezed her hand gently. "Call it instinct or fate or whatever you want, but I knew you were going to be important to me. Best instinct I ever followed." "I was so overwhelmed," Katherine said. "This stranger offering to pay my debts, asking for nothing but my time. It seemed too good to be true." "Was it?" Garrett asked, a slight smile playing at his lips. "No," Katherine said softly. "It was exactly what it seemed. You were exactly who you appeared to be. A good man who saw someone in trouble and helped. And then you gave me so much more than just money. You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have." "You gave me the same thing," Garrett said, pulling her closer. "Gave me a reason to come down from the mountains. Gave me a home and a family and a purpose. I spent 5 years alone thinking that was what I wanted. Then I met you and realized I had just been waiting for you." They sat together as the sun set completely and the stars began to appear, watching their children and counting their blessings. The mercantile in town was doing well, now managed primarily by Emma, who had grown from a young assistant into a capable businesswoman. The ranch was profitable, the cattle healthy and the land productive. But more than any material success, Katherine and Garrett had each other and the family they had built together. In the years that followed, they would face challenges as all families do. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick livestock and business setbacks. But they faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Garrett never went back to the mountains except for the occasional hunting trip, and he never regretted it. Everything he needed was right here. When Katherine turned 30, they threw a party at their ranch. Friends and neighbors came from all over, including Mrs. Chen, who was now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack. She pulled Katherine aside at one point during the celebration. "You know, I knew from the moment I saw you two together," Mrs. Chen said, repeating her favorite claim. "Had that look about you." "You did tell us that," Katherine said with a smile. "And I was right, wasn't I? Look at you now. Beautiful home, beautiful children, a man who adores you. Everything I could have wished for you." "I'm very lucky," Katherine agreed. "Not luck," Mrs. Chen corrected. "You both chose this. Chose each other, chose to build something good. That takes work and commitment, not just luck." She was right, of course. Love was not just a feeling but a choice made every day. Katherine chose Garrett every morning when she woke up beside him, and he chose her in return. They chose their family and their life together, over and over again. More children came in the following years. Another son named William, and then twin girls, Rose and Lily. The house that had seemed so spacious when Garrett first built, it became loud and crowded and full of life. Katherine had never been happier. Garrett was a wonderful father, patient and playful and protective in equal measure. He taught his sons to ride and rope and work the land. He taught his daughters to be strong and independent, insisting they learn all the same skills as their brothers. Katherine taught them all to read and write and figure, determined that her children would have every advantage she could give them. The years passed, marked by birthdays and holidays and everyday moments that made up a life. Jamie grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over most of the ranch operations. Sarah became a teacher in Lone Pine, patient and dedicated to her students. William showed an aptitude for business, helping to expand the mercantile into a small chain of stores across Nevada. The twins, Rose and Lily, went to college back east, something that filled Katherine with both pride and bittersweetness. Through it all, Garrett and Katherine remained each other's constants. Their love, which had started so suddenly that day in the mercantile, deepened and matured over the decades. They had their disagreements and frustrations, as any couple does, but they always came back to each other. Always remembered that first meeting, that instant connection that had changed both their lives. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Garrett took Katherine back to the hidden valley where they had first kissed. They were in their 40s now, graying and weathered but still strong. They stood by the stream, holding hands, and Garrett said what he had said so many times over the years. "Best decision I ever made, walking into your store that day." "Best thing that ever happened to me, you walking in," Katherine replied. "Do you think we would have found each other eventually if I hadn't? If Paul hadn't been threatening you that morning?" Katherine considered the question seriously. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe we would have passed each other on the street and never spoken. I'd like to think fate would have brought us together eventually, but I'm grateful we don't have to know. I'm grateful for how it happened, even though it was terrifying at the time." "I paid your debts and asked for nothing but your time," Garrett said, "and you gave me everything instead. Your love, your life, our family, got so much more than I ever expected or deserved." "You deserved all of it and more," Katherine said firmly. "You saved me, Garrett, not just from Paul and the debt, but from a life of loneliness and struggle. You gave me a partnership, a true partnership, and that's worth more than all the money in the world." They kissed there by the stream, the same spot where they had shared their first kiss 20 years earlier. Some things changed, but some things remained constant. Their love was one of those constants, a foundation that had held firm through 2 decades of joy and sorrow, success and hardship. As they rode back to their ranch that evening, Katherine thought about how much had changed since that August morning in 1883 when a gunshot had shattered her world. A mountain man had walked through her door, stood between her and a creditor, paid her debts and asked for nothing but her time. She had given him that time, and in return, he had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. They had built something together, something lasting and good. A home, a family, a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would remember them and tell their children stories about the mountain man and the merchant's daughter who fell in love in Lone Pine, Nevada, in the wild days of the frontier. And every time those stories were told, people would marvel at how it had all started. With a debt paid and time freely given, with an instant connection that defied logic, with two lonely people who found each other at exactly the right moment. Years continued to pass, bringing new joys and inevitable sorrows. Catherine's beloved Mrs. Chen passed away in 1905, mourned by the entire town. Garrett's mother died a year later, peacefully in her sleep. But there were births too. Jamie married and gave them grandchildren. Sarah followed suit. William and the twins eventually returned to Nevada with families of their own. The ranch prospered, growing into one of the most successful operations in the region. The mercantile chain expanded further, providing steady income and employment for dozens of families. But Garrett and Katherine never forgot their roots, never forgot what it felt like to struggle. They were generous with their success, helping others in the community who faced hardships, remembering how a single act of kindness had changed their lives. In 1910, Garrett was thrown from a horse while working with some young cattle. He broke several ribs and was confined to bed for weeks. Katherine tended to him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her, refusing to leave his side despite their grown children's offers to help. "You're supposed to rest," Garrett grumbled one afternoon as Katherine brought him yet another bowl of soup. "I'm resting with you," Katherine said primly. "Besides, remember when I was pregnant with the twins and so sick I couldn't get out of bed for a month? You barely left the room." "This is just returning the favor." "That was different," Garrett argued. "You were carrying our children." "And you're carrying my heart," Katherine said. "So hush and eat your soup." Garrett recovered fully, though he was more careful with the horses after that. He was in his 50s now, not as young and invincible as he used to be. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man Katherine had fallen in love with all those years ago. On their 30th anniversary in 1913, their children organized a massive party at the ranch. Nearly 200 people attended, friends and family and business associates from across Nevada and beyond. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, food enough to feed an army. At one point, Jamie stood up to speak. His own children clustered around him. "My father likes to tell the story of the day he met my mother," Jamie said. "How he walked into her store and knew immediately that his life was about to change. How he paid her debts expecting nothing in return, just wanting to help. What he doesn't talk about as much is everything that came after. The years of hard work and dedication, the way he loved and supported our mother through everything. The way he taught us kids what it means to be a good person, a good parent, a good partner." Katherine watched Garrett as their son spoke, saw the emotion shining in his eyes. She reached over and took his hand, and he gripped it tightly. "So I want to raise a glass to my parents," Jamie continued. "To Garrett and Katherine Quinn, to 30 years of marriage and a lifetime of love. May we all be lucky enough to find what they found with each other." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Katherine and Garrett stood, embracing each other as their family and friends celebrated around them. It was perfect and overwhelming and exactly what their life together had been, full of love and support and community. That night, long after the party ended and everyone had gone home, Katherine and Garrett sat on their porch under the stars. It was the same porch they had sat on countless times over the years, watching their children grow, planning their future, simply being together. 30 years, Katherine mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday you walked into my store. Other times it feels like you've always been part of my life. Know what you mean, Garrett said. Can barely remember what it was like before you. 5 years alone in the mountains seems like a different life entirely. A different person. You ever miss it? Katherine asked. The solitude, the wilderness, the freedom. Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, but I don't miss the loneliness. And I wouldn't trade what we have for anything. This right here, sitting with you, knowing our children are happy and successful, looking back on a life well lived. This is everything I could have ever wanted. Even though it started with you giving away $1,500 to a stranger. Katherine teased gently. Garrett laughed. Best $1,500 I ever spent. Would do it again in a heartbeat. Would do it for 1/10 of the return I got. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their youngest grandchildren playing while their parents tried to get them ready for bed. The sounds of family, of life continuing, of love passed down through generations. Katherine thought about that terrified young woman she had been 30 years ago, alone and desperate with a creditor threatening everything she had left. She thought about the mountain man who had stepped between her and danger, who had paid her debts and asked for nothing but her time. She thought about how that simple request had led to this, to everything they had built together. "Thank you," she said softly to Garrett. "For what?" he asked, though he was smiling like he knew. "For walking through my door, for standing up to Polk, for asking for my time instead of walking away, for every day since then, every moment, every choice that brought us here." Garrett raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently. "Thank you for giving me your time, for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who probably seemed crazy, for building this life with me, for loving me even when I was difficult or stubborn or scared, for being my partner in every possible way. Always," Katherine promised, "for as long as we both live. And beyond," Garrett added, "I'll love you beyond this life and into whatever comes next." They stayed on the porch late into the night, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. Their story would be told for generations, in their family and in the town of Lone Pine. The mountain man who paid a stranger's debts. The merchant's daughter who gave him her time and her heart. The love that grew from a single act of kindness into a legacy that would endure. As the years continued to pass, Garrett and Katherine aged gracefully together. Their health remained good, and they remained active in their business and their community. They saw their grandchildren grow up and start families of their own, becoming great-grandparents multiple times over. The Quinn family became a fixture in Nevada, known for their integrity, generosity, and the enduring love story that had started it all. In 1923, on their 40th anniversary, Katherine and Garrett returned once more to the hidden valley that had become their special place. They were in their 60s now, moving slower but still strong. They sat by the stream in the exact spot where Garrett had proposed all those years ago. 40 years, Katherine said wonderingly. "We've been married longer than most people live." "And I'd do another 40 if I could," Garrett said. "Never get tired of being with you." They talked about their life together, about all the moments big and small that had made up their marriage. The births of their children, the death of Katherine's father's creditor Theodore Polk, who had died alone and unmourned. The growth of their business. The pride they felt watching their children become good adults who carried on their values. The joy of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "Do you think we did it right?" Katherine asked. This whole life thing, Garrett considered the question seriously, as he always did when Katherine asked something important. "I think we did our best." Made mistakes along the way, sure, but we always tried to do right by each other and by our family. That's all anyone can ask for. I wish everyone could have what we found, Katherine said. This kind of love, this kind of partnership, the world would be a better place. Maybe that's our real legacy, Garrett suggested. Not the ranch or the stores or the money, but showing our children and grandchildren what real love looks like, how to build something lasting. That knowledge will go on long after we're gone. It was a comforting thought, and one that Katherine carried with her as they rode back to the ranch that evening. She looked at Garrett riding beside her, his hair now completely gray but still long, his posture still strong despite his age, and she felt the same flutter of love she had felt that first day when he walked into her store. Time could not diminish what they had found together. Age could not weaken the bond they had forged. They were partners in every sense, two halves of a whole, and they would remain so until the very end. That end came peacefully, many years later when they were both in their 80s. Katherine passed first in her sleep, with Garrett holding her hand. He followed 3 months later, his body simply giving out after a life of hard work and his heart breaking from the loss of his beloved wife. They were buried together on their ranch, under a large pine tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched over the decades. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren spoke about their love story, about the mountain man and the merchant's daughter who had found each other, and built a legacy of love and family. The town of Lone Pine erected a small memorial in their honor, a plaque in front of what had been Katherine's mercantile. It told their story in brief, how Garrett Quinn had paid Katherine Zimmerman's debts in 1883, asking for nothing but her time, and how that simple request had led to one of the greatest love stories the frontier had ever known. And for generations after, when young couples in Lone Pine got married, someone would always tell the story of Garrett and Katherine Quinn, how love could start in the most unexpected ways, how a single act of kindness could change everything, how when you found the right person, you held on tight and built something beautiful together. Their ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. The mercantile chain continued to thrive. But more than any material legacy, Garrett and Katherine left behind something far more valuable. They left behind proof that love could conquer loneliness, that generosity could change lives, that two people who were meant to be together would find each other no matter the circumstances. In the end, Garrett had paid Katherine's debts and asked for her time. She had given him that time freely and joyfully, and in return, they had built a love story that would be remembered as long as there were people to remember it. They had found each other in the wild west of Nevada in 1883, two lonely souls who became one strong partnership, and their love had created ripples that spread far beyond their own lives. It was exactly the kind of ending they both would have wanted. A life fully lived, a love fully realized, a legacy fully earned. And somewhere beyond this world they were together still, their hands joined, their hearts united forever and always.